My family's dairy farm had survived for generations, long before the new HOA development appeared beside us. Then the HOA president decided one of our most important farm utilities was suddenly her business. The $14,000 milk cooler wasn't a luxury. It protected every gallon of milk before the tanker arrived. If that cooler stopped working, thousands of dollars of product could be at risk within hours. Linda, the HOA president, had already complained about our trucks using the farm access road. Now she claimed the farm's electrical equipment was somehow creating problems for her neighborhood. She handed me an HOA notice and demanded that I change the way the farm received electrical service. I told her the HOA had no authority over equipment located on my property. The next morning, the cooler suddenly lost power. I checked the equipment and realized this wasn't a normal mechanical failure. The electrical supply had been interrupted. I immediately called an emergency electrician and started documenting everything. The temperature inside the cooler was climbing, and every minute mattered. The electrician traced the problem back to the farm service connection. What he found made it clear that the interruption wasn't something I had caused. He told me the service needed an emergency rewire and a new protected connection. The preliminary estimate was already far higher than I expected. The emergency work was going to cost tens of thousands of dollars, and the clock was still running on the milk stored inside my cooler. I authorized the emergency repair because protecting the farm came first. But I also started gathering every document, photograph, invoice, and message connected to the outage. Linda seemed convinced that the HOA had done nothing wrong. She even told the board that the farm would eventually have to comply with their rules. I went through my property records and utility documents line by line. The paperwork showed exactly where my property ended and where the HOA's responsibility began. The survey showed that the affected electrical equipment served my private farm operation. The HOA's claim over it was much weaker than Linda had made it sound. I took the records to an attorney and asked one simple question: who had authorized the power interruption? The answer was going to determine who was responsible for the emergency costs. The emergency electricians worked through the day to restore reliable power. Every new component was documented because I knew the final bill could become evidence. Finally, the cooler came back online and began pulling the temperature down. I had saved the equipment, but the financial damage was only beginning to become clear. When the invoices arrived, the emergency electrical work alone was staggering. Then we added the inspections, temporary measures, service calls, and other documented losses. The documented total eventually reached about $42,000. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to simply absorb the cost and move on. I requested a formal meeting with the HOA board. Linda walked in expecting another argument about farm rules, but I brought documentation instead. I laid out the timeline from the power interruption to the emergency repair. Then I showed them exactly how the $42,000 figure had been calculated. The room became noticeably quieter when the board members compared the survey with Linda's earlier claims. For the first time, she had to answer questions she couldn't simply dismiss. Linda insisted she had only been trying to protect the neighborhood, but protecting the neighborhood didn't explain why my private farm service had been interrupted. Then the utility representative explained the service history to everyone in the room. The technical records gave us the missing piece of the timeline. The board realized emergency rewire had been necessary because the original service had been disrupted. The question was no longer whether the expense existed. It was who should pay it. The utility company conducted a final inspection and confirmed the repaired service was properly installed. The evidence trail was now complete from beginning to end. After negotiations, the HOA agreed to cover the documented costs connected to the emergency incident. The final amount came to approximately $42,000. Linda had started the fight, believing the HOA could control everything around the neighborhood. She ended it realizing that property boundaries and documented responsibilities still mattered. For me, the biggest victory wasn't the money. It was knowing that my farm could keep operating without someone outside the property trying to control its essential equipment. I learned one important lesson. Never underestimate the power of good records and clear property boundaries. When someone crosses a line, facts can speak much louder than arguments. The HOA wanted control, but the paperwork told a very different story, and that mistake ended up costing them $42,000. If you enjoyed this HOA story, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from.